I think the framework for me is calculated risk. One of the great lines I learned at Edelweiss is, if you're thinking about taking a risk, you ask yourself two questions. Is it worth it? So if you are taking the risk, the upside has to be worth taking the risk, right? You don't go fight a bunch of villains for a very small outcome. I mean, it has to be really big to want to make you fight. And then second is, can I afford it? And that can I afford it is the calculated side of it. I think everyone has had a history with rejection, but it is almost unspoken because in Indian households, it's almost taboo to speak about our society. And I do believe that as the world is getting more social media centric, this whole thing around rejection is getting even more complicated because we truly believe. I mean, I've had friends going through difficult times, going through rejection, and not sharing something because they believed everyone's marriage was out of a Suraj Bajatiya film and everyone's life was what they saw on Facebook and Instagram, or the career is like what they saw on LinkedIn. And the reality is far from that. In fact, the reality is that in a country like India, where the odds are so high, anything you apply for, whether it's a clerical job or whether it's a CEO's job or whether it's a college, you will get rejected. And so dealing with this and processing it is extremely important. I mean, it is extremely important. A colleague of mine once told me that India has so many gods, and so many temples that you also make a conscious choice of which one to go to, and even a god gets rejected in some funny and twisted way.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. A warm and enthusiastic welcome to the new episode of our Dialogue with the Veteran series. On the occasion of World Financial Planning Week, we have brought to you a very special episode with a very special guest. She is an achiever, a super achiever. As far as her achievements are concerned, she is limitless. She is CEO of India's fastest growing mutual fund house. She is India's only female head of a major asset manager and has set up country's first domestic hedge fund. She is the vice-chairperson of AMFI and a young global leader at World Economic Forum. She is an influencer, a public speaker, and an author of the book Limitless. A YouTube video of one of her talks titled "The Girl with the Broken Neck" has been viewed 116k times. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been our privilege to host the distinguished CEO of Edelweiss Asset Management, Ms. Radhika Gupta. In this captivating episode, she has spoken to us a whole lot of things: investment philosophy, risk management strategy, big ideas of the future, about influences in her life, about her book, words of wisdom for investors like us. So let us tune into this powerful conversation with this powerful lady, Ms. Radhika Gupta.
Thank you so much, Radhika, for accepting this. Accepting this request and coming on this video podcast. Yours has been a dramatic journey, and we all have gone through that on the net. But there are certain things which I still want to know, which still intrigues me. Like when everything was going wonderfully well, you took a call, you took a risk, and you wanted to return to India and started something on your own. What made you do that?
Okay, so it wasn't a very academic decision, Suresh. And firstly, it's great to be here. It wasn't a very academic decision. I think, often when you are 23, 24, you are a young professional, you take decisions and they turn out to be, as I said in retrospect, amazing decisions. Now,
Right.
I always say that from a global Indian's perspective, if
Yeah.
you were sitting in the US in 2007, 8, you were actually seeing India blossom. The bull market of 3, 4, 5, 6 had happened, and you were seeing opportunities sort of emerge. And I think that was not a conscious but subconscious reason to take that decision. So I think that was the start of it. I have always liked change, and I've always liked challenges. I've always liked doing something different. There's a running joke that I get bored every few years because my father was a diplomat. So I think a combination of all these things. I don't really have. At that point I didn't have roots in India because my parents hadn't lived here. So
Okay.
it was not personal in any way. It was just a desire to come back and do something.
Okay. Wonderful. I mean, that decision has, in retrospect, proved to be a wonderful decision on your part.
Yeah, I pretty much think that that is one of the finest pieces of market timing that a person could have pulled off.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And the other thing is, see, you are in finance. I mean, we are in investing. Volatility risk are endemic in this area. You have
Yes.
taken risks yourself in many areas, and so I wanted to know from you, what is your take on risk? Because a lot of times when people take risks, they themselves do not see that as a risk, while other people may see that as a risk. So, what is your take on risk?
So my take on risk is, and I've never thought of myself as a hugely risk-taking person. I've not thought of myself as a risk-averse person. I I think the framework for me is calculated risk. One of the great lines I learned at Edelweiss is, uh, if you're thinking about taking a risk, you ask yourself two questions. Is it worth it? So if you are taking the risk, the upside has to be worth taking the risk, right? You don't go fight a bunch of villains for a very small outcome. I mean, it has to be really big to want to make you fight. And then second is, can I afford it? And that can I afford it is the calculated side of risk. So even when I was moving back from the US, it was very important for me to think of worst case outcomes. One of those kids who had, kind of struggled to make it abroad, finally settled down. What's the worst case? Perhaps it was going back to business school. So I always think of risk in these two things. And I think that really helps me clarify what's the upside I'm going to get and what's the worst case downside. And if I'm okay with both outcomes, then, I'm ready to go ahead and take that risk.
Okay. I mean, that's a good take on risk. Yeah. In your book, the book that you've written, Limitless, you have talked about rejections. In fact, your views on rejection
Yes.
are quite fresh in its perspective. Whether it is ambition is involved, rejection is inevitable. I mean, so that's a very intriguing kind of a statement that you made. It's a very positive take on rejection. So, I mean, please take us through the what you mean by that. What has rejection been? How you arrived at those conclusions? I mean, if you can just throw some light on that at a personal level.
I think everyone has had a history with rejection, but it is almost unspoken because in Indian households, it's almost taboo to speak about our society. And I do believe that as the world is getting more social media centric, this whole thing around rejection is getting even more complicated because we truly believe. I mean, I've had friends going through difficult times, going through rejection, and not sharing something because they believed everyone's marriage was out of a Suraj Barjatya film and everyone's life was what they saw on Facebook and Instagram,
Yeah.
or the career is like what they saw on LinkedIn. And the reality is far from that. In fact, the reality is that in a country like India, where the odds are so high, anything you apply for, whether it's a clerical job or whether it's a CEO's job or whether it's a college, you will get rejected. And so dealing with this and processing it is extremely important. I mean, it is extremely important. A colleague of mine once told me that India has so many gods, and so many temples that you also make a conscious choice of which one to go to, and even a god gets rejected in some funny and twisted way. So rejection happens to all of us. I think processing it wisely is important. Being one of the things I did write about in my book that I think is very important is the importance of speaking up and finding support networks, because these days you see so much noise about people taking drastic action, etc. And I do think when you have people to talk to, you make better decisions.
Yeah. In your own book, again, you have emphasized about wearing your weakness as an armor, accepting
Yes.
and having pride in what you are, where you come from. So, are you really
Yes.
talking about authenticity, acceptance, self-esteem on your part? I mean, is that what you're alluding to?
Multiple things. I think the core premise of my book is finding self-confidence, because I have a son today, and if there's one thing I want him to do, it is learn self-confidence. And I think, and that's where my book ends also. And I think self-confidence is because it is a very powerful thing, right? The way you carry yourself really defines the way the world sees you. And for me, what is extremely important is that whatever you do, you make choices that work for you. You do things that you do because they give you choice. They're conscious things that they give you happiness. You don't make decisions that are influenced by other people. And that's why I've talked about this, so much.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that is very, very important. Accepting yourself, having the self-confidence, and showing the world who you are in its unvarnished form. I think that is very, very important.
And I think it's been extremely, at least in my own journey, I think when you reach out and show a vulnerable side to you, which we rarely do, you will find people support up. You
Yeah,
will find people coming to your help.
correct, correct. I remember that, where you had talked about that seventh time or eighth time
Yeah,
when she offered the job and you hugged her and you are inconsolable. That comes across as that vulnerability shows up and the other person just laughs it away. So that is
absolutely.
so very beautiful, actually.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I think people are attracted. I mean, when we watch a movie, we are rarely attracted to, someone who's had it all, got it all, figured it all out. We almost always fall in love with the underdog.
correct. Very true, very true. So, you have gone through a roller coaster ride. All of us do go through roller coaster rides, but there are always people or things which, influence us at all points in time. They are kind of the rock of Gibraltar, which around which
Yes.
we have certain moral principles going around that. So, who was your rock of Gibraltar?
I think family. And it's everyone says family, but in my case, it's a little bit unique because my parents have been an extremely important influence because when I grew up, I had no sense of school friends. So
Okay,
because my father moved countries every 3 years, and at that point, and this makes me sound very old, there was no social media. I really had no notion of cousins, relatives, extended family, etc. So my family has been a very, very strong influence. I think in the toughest moments, I know that, I may make mistakes, I may mess up, uh, but the family is there.
okay. Wonderful, wonderful. So, what about your investment philosophy at the firm level, at your personal level? What is your, say, overriding investment philosophy?
So I think the overriding investment philosophy is obviously we live in a growth market and we are in search of companies that are growing. Uh, but we want to buy them at reasonable prices. And finally, we want to partner with good entrepreneurs. I am a big believer. I run a business myself in the spirit of Indian entrepreneurship. I think the Indian entrepreneur is incredible. And finally, investing is about partnering with and finding great stories of entrepreneurship uh, who have solved or are solving meaningful problems for consumers, making money through that, doing it in a sustainable way. Sustainable, I don't mean environmentally, but in a consistent way, and are fair because we are minority shareholders in companies, are fair to their shareholders. I don't believe in notions of growth or value. I think companies are companies. We like to label heroes as action and romantic heroes and companies as growth and value companies. But finally, it is stories of entrepreneurship.
Okay. Yeah, got it, got it. Then talking about managing money expectations, at the asset management in the company level, you need to manage money expectations at scale. How do you maintain a balance between meeting investors' expectation and pursuing long-term investment strategy for sustainable growth? So these two can probably cause a problem, right?
Yeah, this is always a tricky one, and I think especially in markets like the ones that we're sitting in, I think the thing that often scares me the most is how, where expectations grow. I had a customer, Suresh, I was talking to a few days ago, and he was telling me, बस small cap fund में पैसे डाल दो, रोज %0.5 मिलेगा मैड. And that's a sign of expectations. And I also, Suresh, believe that most of the things that go wrong in investing, the reason people are unhappy is usually a case of expectations. So I think managing expectations is important. I think a few things work for us. One is we try to have great clarity in what we will do and what we will not do in our investment process. So if we run a mid-cap fund, we are not going to hold large caps in it meaningfully, or not actively buy large caps. Now, does that mean the fund will run like a mid-cap fund and it could be more volatile? Yes, it is. If we are following a particular strategy, like a momentum strategy in BAF, it will have periods of underperformance. And before we start communicating it to the outside world, it's very important that I know it as a CEO who's reviewing, the team knows it, the sales team knows it, and we document. So before we rush to go outward, I think a lot of internal clarity in what we are doing, why we're doing, when it will not do well, so that we can be counter-cyclical. I believe my job is to be counter-cyclical. So when the fund is going through a bad run, which all funds will go through, don't kid yourself, my job is to stand by the fund manager. My job is to stand by the team when everyone is attacking them. So I think that helps. Secondly, I think in terms of investment style, we try to trot the middle path. So we don't want to be people who hit the ball out of the park and get hit out often. And, it has negative consequences also, I must tell you, because it is a very performance driven environment. But we prefer a model that is more consistent, because if you deliver consistency, then people get less agitated and they stay. And the third is, of course, very aggressive communication. So if you talk to me and ask me what equity returns are, I'll say 10 to 12%, and most people will shoot me because, they just believe it is too conservative. We like to talk about the downside of funds. So, when we are marketing a particular fund, we like to talk about worst case outcomes. And when funds underperform, we like to communicate aggressively. So I remember we run the country's largest China fund, and China went through a really rough period. And believe me, my team was really aggressive in communication. In fact, some people told me and said, don't do it, yeah, just say कि वो JP Morgan related कुछ था, etc., etc. And I said, listen, it's an Edelweiss fund,
Yeah.
and it is Edelweiss's responsibility. So I am not going to run away from that responsibility.
Correct. So two things I hear. One is set clear-cut expectations and communicate that quite aggressively. So that is something that I'm hearing. The other thing which I'm
Yes,
also hearing is that, whatever is the mandate, stick to that mandate. And you keep
it's
communicating,
so
you keep telling people that this is the mandate and it will ultimately play out.
So many mistakes are made in life by not sticking to mandate.
Absolutely.
I mean, I can't tell you how important this is to me. And I always tell my fund teams, I said, I'm sure I'm tremendously unpopular with you, but mandate is mandate. And, either we have a call to change the mandate or we just stick to it.
Correct. Absolutely. All said and done, Edelweiss Asset Management has achieved significant milestones. It has crossed 1 lakh crore of AUM under your leadership. So what are your big ideas for the company going forward? I mean, the mutual fund industry itself is on a roll. I'm sure your company is going to also go places. So what are your big ideas for your company?
So I think, I would love to come and give you a huge, big, disruptive idea, but I think asset management is a simple business. And in India, we are sitting at a point where mutual fund penetration to GDP is only 16%, when the global average is now hit close to 80%. I think we just need to keep working at it, winning investors' trust, and there are natural catalysts that we benefit from. For instance, this whole movement around formalization, this whole movement around digitization and UPI, so many things, the increase in per capita income, all of these are going to be things that we benefit from.
So
So we just need to do our job well. Mutual fund sahi hai. We just need to do our job damn well and we'll be fine.
So can I put it like you just have to do the right things, avoid blunders. Can I put it that way?
Oh, absolutely. You just have to stay in the game.
Okay, fine, great. So as a close of this discussion, I mean, what will be your words of wisdom? What do you want to tell the investing community at large? And what is your encouragement for the investors?
So I think, investors are sitting in a great place. If you are invested in India over the next decade, I think the country will grow and you will create tremendous wealth. The odds are almost stacked in your favor, which is something that is fairly rare to say. Now it's about making the best of those odds. And I think the best shot you have at it is really Indian equities. Of course, I'm not advocating that someone only holds equities. The basics of asset allocation are important, but really just buying basic equity funds and holding them for the long term solves the problems of most consumers. We love to complicate our life with active and passive and this category and that category. Honestly, I've never seen a customer who's done a 10-year SIP and an equity fund and not been happy if they have reasonable expectations.
Good. I think that's very sane advice. Have reasonable expectations. Radhika says here that 10 to 12% is what you should expect in equity, and be probably positively surprised later on. We are in a good place. I think there is no question about where India is going, at least in this decade. We don't know about the future, but at least in this decade, I think we are in a good place. So thank you, Radhika, for this wonderful, very short but wonderful interview. Your insights are always valuable. Always, we will cherish it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Suresh. It was a pleasure talking to you.